All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
So, as you know, suddenly many of the fiercest advocates of #MeToo and believe women have been conspicuously silent on or dismissive of the new sexual assault claim leveled at Joe Biden by Tara Reade. Biden has denied those claims. Few have been more noticeably absent from that conversation, though, than actress Alyssa Milano. Recall that Milano, more than maybe any other figure, helped to popularize the #MeToo hashtag. She supported the Time's Up organization, the one that wouldn't help Tara Reade because she had accused a political figure. In fact, Alyssa was so dedicated to the movement that she actually attended the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings at which Kavanaugh and his accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, both spoke. Here's what Alyssa had to say about her attendance at the time.
You were invited as a guest of Senator Dianne Feinstein to be there at the hearing. Why was it important for you to be there?
Oh, so many reasons, but I think most of all, I don't believe that any man's misogyny should take precedent over a survivor's humanity.
Now, the tweet, which perhaps best represented her feelings at the time anyway, was this one. You can't pretend to be the party of the American people and then not support a woman who comes forward with her Me Too story. Now, you'll recall that one of the main arguments that Kavanaugh defenders made was that he deserved due process. Feminists and activists countered, rightly in my view, that while everyone is of course entitled to due process within the criminal justice system, no one is entitled to serve on the Supreme Court or in the context of Trump as president of the United States. And of course, in most instances of sexual assault, there are no other witnesses, so it can be nearly impossible to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So hold that thought for a moment about Trump and Kavanaugh defenders arguing for due process, because Milano just gave an interview to Andy Cohen in which she explained why she had been silent about Tara Reade's claim against Joe Biden. Take a listen.
I have not publicly said anything about this. If you remember, it kind of took me a long time to publicly say anything about Harvey as well. Okay. Because I believe that even though we should believe women, and that is an important thing, and what that statement really means is, for so long the go-to has been not to believe them. So really we have to sort of societally change that mindset to believing women, but that does not mean at the expense of not giving men their due process and investigating situations.
Little different tone there, Alyssa. What happened? Suddenly, she's decided that due process is required now that it has to do with the man she's thrown all in for, Joe Biden. Now, nothing I could possibly say would be more damning than Alyssa's own manifest hypocrisy and double standards. Instead, I'll lift up the righteous anger of activist and survivor Rose McGowan, who said of Alyssa on Twitter, "You are a fraud. This is about holding the media accountable. You go after Trump and Kavanaugh saying believe victims. You are a lie. You have always been a lie." Of course, no one is more delighted by Alyssa's comments than those who would dismiss credible claims against Trump or Kavanaugh or other powerful men, and who would prefer that all these women just go back to quietly bottling up their pain. Alyssa has just, in one fell swoop, done more damage to the movement she claims to care about than any right-wing apologist possibly could. There was another piece of Alyssa's nauseating excuse-making that really stood out to me, though. Let's take a listen to that.
Mainstream media would be jumping all over this as well if
we weren't in a pandemic. If there was more credible, if there was evidence that was.
If they found more evidence or through their investigation. So I'm just kind of staying quiet about it.
So just to think about this, Alyssa is arguing that if a claim is credible, surely the mainstream media would have picked it up and run with it. Yes, because the mainstream press is always falling all over themselves to hold Joe Biden and other establishment Democrats to account. Have you met the press? They overhype, ignore, distract, and outright lie on a routine basis. Now, of course, one of the many great ironies of this whole situation is that Ryan Grim of The Intercept was instrumental in bringing Dr. Ford's story to light, and he was also instrumental in reporting out the Time's Up portion of Tara's story. So weird that now Ryan's reporting isn't good enough for Alyssa or for the mainstream press. But just think of what an absolutely insane standard Alyssa is setting here. Only those claims and women that the mainstream press deemed to be worthy are allowed into the warm embrace of the Believe Women mantra. Surely, Alyssa would see the way that the press routinely ignores vulnerable communities. Am I really supposed to count on Bezos' Washington Post or Morning Joe for justice? Lord, I really hate rehashing all this history, but apparently someone needs reminding of how NBC reportedly tried to quash Ronan Farrow's reporting on Harvey Weinstein, or how Amy Robach fumed about not being able to report on Epstein to preserve Will and Kate access. The media routinely buries inconvenient stories, especially when they involve powerful men. I suppose it's Believe Women when the press doesn't need royal wedding access or a Hillary Clinton interview. That sounds great. Just to be clear on my own views here, I'm not actually a lockstep Me Too proponent. I think that at times the judgment has been too harsh and too swift against men who stand accused of much less egregious offenses than a Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein or Bill Cosby or even a Joe Biden. But I believe Dr. Ford should be heard and taken seriously, and I believe that Tara Reade deserves to be heard and taken seriously. These are not light or frivolous claims, and as Tara can tell you firsthand, it's no fun to have your every life decision and utterance picked over in a coordinated effort to smear and dismiss you. As far as credibility goes, I think it's also important to note that unlike Dr. Ford, Tara reportedly actually told her family and a close friend at the time. This contemporaneous recounting is significant given the fact that there are often no direct witnesses to these alleged assaults. I don't need a blue check over at WAPO to tell me that. I figured it out all by myself. Of course, now that Tara's story has a celebrity angle attached to it, it'll probably actually get far more coverage. So congrats there too, Alyssa. You're doing just great. She has been so absent from this conversation because she was the first person who she wasn't the first person to use the Me Too hashtag, but she was the first celebrity who put it out there, who got this all started, involved in the Time's Up organization. She dropped out of an Andrew Yang fundraiser because of a reported sexual harassment incident involving one of his staff members. And then when all of this happens, nothing. And then she goes on with Andy Cohen, and her rationalizations are so hypocritical. I mean, it literally was like verbatim what Kavanaugh defenders were saying during that time.
Yeah, I mean, Alyssa Milano has always been a fraud. And I'm glad Rose McGowan, but first of all, she's breaking my heart because I loved Charmed when I was a kid. But, you know, you're looking at all this and you're like, she drops out of this Andrew Yang fundraiser. She has the clapping emoji, been the most vocal, Time's Up ally, all this stuff. And you have always seen it. I mean, I think people on the right have always seen it, is that so many of these Believe Women cohort have always been cynical political actors who didn't believe anything on Bill Clinton and could care less about what happened with Bill Clinton. And, were the ones who touted the Kavanaugh ones solely because they care about the Supreme Court and that vote and Roe versus Wade. And that's fine, but they should have just said that. But they can't because it would undermine the moral preening and credibility of everything that they shouted at the time. So on this one, they do the exact same thing that they did with Bill Clinton, with so many others. They just stay silent. They refuse to adequately apply their standard across the board to all of these different things. And that is something that really bothers me, because you can see that whenever these things are cynically used against one and another, it both undermines a cause that you care about, and it validates and enrages many of the people who were on the other side of being lectured as rape apologists and others for definitively knowing that at a time when you were being vilified, in the mainstream press and so much of it had nothing to do with any moral authority, and it was purely about power. So it validates two terrible things. It's bad for people who want to come forward. It's bad for people who have always known and yet finally get the confirmation that this was always political, when so much of the logic is, like you said, I mean, if anything, the claim is more credible than Dr. Ford's, and yet nothing. See, there's no going over it in the Washington Post. So many of these outlets printed it outright at the time because there was a deadline. There's a deadline here, the same thing. It's just a job interview. Okay, it's just a job interview. It's not a court of law. They said due process doesn't apply. Again, she even used the words due process, which I was like, oh my God. I mean, you have got to be kidding.
In other comments in that same interview, which people should really go and listen to, it's just like 3 minutes long if you go look at it on YouTube. I mean, she's stumbling through it, trying to rationalize it. She's saying, I mean, it literally sounded exactly what was said about Kavanaugh. It's like, I never thought that Me Too and Believe Women would mean throwing accusations at an innocent man who I've known for a long time. Interestingly, back during the Kavanaugh hearings, so I went back and listened to some of what she was saying at the time, she actually brought up the Anita Hill hearings as a formative experience for her, of course, led by Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Joe Biden. So interesting that connection as well. But that you would then put it on the media. I mean, it's this like circular logic of it must not be credible because the media didn't report on it. And so the media gets a pass and they get to decide which claims are worthy and which aren't. I mean, I think that part of it really was galling to me as well. And I'm upset about it because I wanted to believe that these people actually were going to stick to their principles. I wanted to believe that they actually meant the things that they said. Because the Clinton stuff, look, I was like a child at the time, you know, and I felt like young feminists shouldn't have all that put on them in the past. Like, I wasn't involved in any of that. And the so-called feminists at the time, behavior was, in retrospect, absolutely abhorrent and disgusting and dismissive of women and slut-shaming and all of that. I was like, but that was, you know, that was the 90s. That was like a long time ago. Maybe people have evolved. And you see in this moment, and it's not just Alyssa, right? Alyssa is maybe the most notable example because she's been so out front on all of this and because she's such a prominent Joe Biden endorser and supporter, but it's not just her. How many blue check feminists have been totally silent? Or like Amanda Marcotte over at Salon, right, who went through a whole complicated rationalization of why all these red flags are justification for the media to totally ignore this, which is absurd. Yeah. Which, if applied in a different context, she would see that all of these rationalizations are exactly what you do if you dig through I don't care who you are. You dig through everything that I've said or you've said or anyone else has said their whole life, you can find things to be used to discredit them, make them look stupid, make them look weird or fringe or kooky or whatever. And that is used as a rationalization to dismiss women all the time. And now all the so-called feminists are doing the exact same thing.
And we just, look, we already know. The script has been written. How is it when the other shoe is on the other foot and the accuser has an R next to their name? It's completely different.
Everything
goes out the window.
Anti-establishment.
Or
because
anti-establishment.
you can bet if this was a Bernie Sanders accuser, things would be going a lot differently right now.
Tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, Joe Biden has done multiple interviews, never been asked about it. If you know any other person, they would have been asked.
Such an abdication.
There's been no written story about it in mainstream press. There's been no real coverage. There's been and people just dismiss it outright because, that's the most pernicious part of this, is the feedback loop.
Right.
On if the press doesn't cover it, it's not legit, and therefore I don't have to take it seriously. It's like, first of all, can't you think for yourself? Like you said, you don't need a blue check mark at the Washington Post in order to read something and critically be like, okay, this is my frame of mind and I analyze this as credible or not. You outsource credibility to people who have already proven that they have no credibility.
Right.
And that's the most disgusting and pernicious part of the whole thing.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All right, next on Rising. A new Gallup poll examines the toll that social distancing and self-quarantine have on emotional well-being. We're going to hear more about that poll from Gallup editor-in-chief Muhammad Yunus. That one, Rising, continues.